Hello, podcast listener. This is your host with the most, JJ Gordon. Today's episode of JJ Meets World is dedicated to the late, the great Stan the Man Lee. You might know him from the millions of comic books that he's produced over the years, and of course, his amazing cameos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We have a deep dive into Stan Lee, the man, the co-creator of Marvel, the kindly uncle, as Tucker puts it, who touched all of our lives in one way or another. Plus, Tucker and I talk about the fact that nostalgia is really heavy right now. In fact, you might even get nostalgic for this episode at some point. By the way, speaking of nostalgia, there's no better way to scratch that itch than to head to patreon.com/JJMeetsWorld and throw us a couple dollars, because we'll start mentioning things that you're nostalgic about, like, I don't know, Flintstones Push Pop Sherberts, huh? That's right, that was a tease for you. Strap in and listen to this episode of JJ Meets World with Greg Carlson, and dedicated to Stan Lee.
1, 2, 3, 4. JJ Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is! He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. JJ has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprain. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
This episode features a lot of nostalgia. We talk about the late, great Stan Lee and his influence, plus just about comics and the comic book world in general. But it deals a lot with the nostalgia. So when you think of what's your favorite comic, it's usually the comic series that you associate with like a grand time of your childhood.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree with that.
And I think that goes for so many things. And nostalgia is such a huge market these days. How many companies are just built on the idea of nostalgia? We've got a toy shelf in the studio that's full of toys. Almost all of them have a nostalgia feel. There's a Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life. We've got the real Ghostbusters, a samurai, John Belushi.
I think we are part of a segment of the population where nostalgia marketing really kicked into high gear, because we grew up with all sorts of new kinds of media, different kinds of shows that they were never making before. And so the things that you could be nostalgic for, the pop culture you could be nostalgic for, there's just more of it now. But we're also getting to the point where we're going to start seeing nostalgia items for things that came after us that we have no nostalgia for. And that's going to seem weird. Like the kind of nostalgia kicks we're getting now, some of them will form new audiences and carry them forward, and others we might not actually see again until we're in retirement homes and they need to find new ways to entertain us, because VR just isn't cutting it.
I imagine companies like Nickelodeon will stop making theme parks and start making retirement homes. It's like, hey, it's the Nickelodeon retirement home. 50 rocking chairs shaped like your favorite Rugrats character.
You are not really a comic book guy. Mm-mm. You know, you like the movies and the characters and the theatricality and the pageantry. You like all that. But I would never have thought to buy you a comic book, except one time I was in an antique shop and saw issue number 1 of, it was a John Candy comic.
Camp Candy.
And I thought, I have to get this for JJ. And I bought it, and then I think I held on to it for like a year until I remembered to give it to you.
Yep.
But that's what I think comic books are. They're like if they're not, either they're something that you look on with fond memories, or they're a good gift to give to someone because you go, this is in your wheelhouse and this is a story that you might care about.
I have all the issues of Camp Candy. I don't think that there's probably a lot of other people out there who have the complete Camp Candy series. I also have a lunchbox.
How long did the series go for?
Oh, maybe like 7 issues.
Oh, that's it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't last very long. It was based on an animated television series of the same name.
Right. And that was when they were still making comics using newsprint.
Yep.
Right. And I think it was probably like not dot matrix, but pointillized style of painting too.
Yeah.
Like they used to do. The color separations and stuff.
Camp Candy. I love it so much. Wish I could go to the real Camp Candy, but alas, John is gone.
You're the closest thing we have to John Candy right now, JJ. I'm just going to tell you that.
Well, he does have children.
You're closer to him than them. Remember, you told me his own daughter told you that you reminded her of him.
Yep, when I met Jennifer Candy at Second City. That was maybe one of the greatest moments of my entire life. And when people compliment me, and it's always a compliment in my eyes when someone's like, hey, you kind of look like John Candy, or you remind me of John Candy. Like, oh, thank you so much.
Right. Well, I guess for your fandoms, you're not worried about new John Candy stuff coming out and ruining your old memories of it.
Right. It's almost like it's saved in a weird sort of vault somewhere.
Right. But that's another thing that we talk about in this podcast is the weird kinds of gatekeeping, protective attachment that certain fans will have to things that they latch onto, and then they become so rigid in their fandom that they sort of police the fandom of others or try to say, no, you can't do that with this character or these things. And we talk about how silly that way of thinking is.
We also have a huge request at the very beginning of the episode that's cookie related. So when you listen to this, if you need to get a hold of us, you can find us. Probably the easiest way is to message us on Facebook at the JJ Meets World Facebook page, which, by the way, you can go to anytime you want. If you have an idea for a guest or a subject that you'd like us to talk about, we've got some interesting things in the upcoming months that I think you guys are really, really going to enjoy. But
slide into our DMs.
Right. Let's get straight into this episode with Greg Carlson, where we remember the late, the great Stan Lee. Excelsior.
JJ Meets World.
So let's start this podcast out with a request to the internet. Greg, you're looking for a Thor cookie jar, a very specific.
I think right
Thor
from 2012. I think it's a Westland. Is that the brand name? I'm not sure. Westlake, Westland, the one that makes it has to be a sculptural bust. It can't be, because there are lots of cookie jars where, like, for instance, Superman coming out of the phone booth, which is cool. But I'm only interested in the head and shoulders of the superhero.
So if you happen to have one of those,
let me know.
Reach out to previous guest Greg Carlson. We're here and we're talking about something that was sad. I was in a weird way excited because I broke the news in the Fargo-Moorhead area. TMZ put their unconfirmed report up.
The news in the FM area.
And I was on air at the time.
Because you're the first person to read the TMZ article.
Well, no, because I was on air at the time, and I read that, and immediately I was like, flip the mics on, and I said, unconfirmed reports, Marvel co-creator Stan Lee dead at 95.
Mm-hmm.
You beat Madeline to the punch. We know that much.
By 15 minutes on social media.
Right.
And I was kind of taken to task a little bit because they're like, you can't just say something because TMZ said it. And I said, I think that TMZ would be very wary of posting that.
TMZ has some, actually, even though they cover schlock usually, they've got a pretty good track record of getting actual factual information.
They end up being cited by the mainstream press often because they're breaking.
Because they are mostly without scruples when it comes to... Anyways, we're getting off the Stan Lee thing, but yeah.
So Stan Lee, of course, one of the most influential people of the 20th century, and then somehow even got more influential in the 21st century by expanding his media empire. We welcome Greg Carlson back onto the podcast. I think now you've got the record for the most visits of any other guest.
All right,
so we're excited to have you back.
And we're going to run up that score too.
Yeah, I feel like an honorary guest, a special guest. Like I'm the Will Ferrell to your Jimmy Fallon.
Yes.
I'm the Bill Murray to your David Letterman. You're
the John Goodman to our Saturday Night Live.
There you go.
Who I think is easily the most consistent as the best guest host.
He's way up there. I mean, maybe Alec Baldwin is pretty slick too. But
so let's talk about Stan Lee, huh?
Sure, let's do it. Well, Tucker started it off by saying that he was overcome with emotion.
Yeah.
Even though Stan Lee was not a young man.
No, there are celebrity deaths all the time. You hear about people passing away all the time, and you know that your heroes will eventually pass away too because they are flesh and blood. So yeah, I knew that. Actually, I've known for probably 10, 15 years that it could be any day now for a man of his age because you don't know where the health goes and everything else. But Stan Lee was a person who I worshipped from a very young age. Before I even knew the name of George Lucas or Jim Henson or all these other big names in pop culture creation, Stan Lee was someone who I knew.
And what was the first awareness for you? Because I think a lot of people were reflecting on that. When was the first time you were like, oh, this is the guy that does this?
I don't remember the exact moment, but it would have been probably 91, 92 for me, because that was around the age that my dad had given me all of his old comic books, which were mostly Marvel comics. So he would have told me about Stan Lee, and then Stan Lee wrote a bullpen editorial in every issue. So I saw his name a lot, and if you were a reader of Marvel comics, especially from the Bronze Age into the first beginnings of the modern age, when Stan Lee was still very heavily involved in the books, his name was everywhere. So oftentimes it would be Stan Lee Presents, or he would be giving commentary within the panels that were from him that you could tell, because it was the kind of magical showman vernacular that he would use. He was always using words that he would later become known for, like Excelsior, which he would end anything he wrote with. And he had this sort of presence of the sort of kindly uncle that you look forward to seeing from time to time, and he was such a good storyteller and so big. And then I remember getting a VHS copy of The Pride of the X-Men, which was a pilot for a X-Men show that didn't take off, where he did the narration for it. And then when Pizza Hut had a special when the X-Men series from 1992 came on, and you could get one of the first 2 episodes on VHS, and he had an opening sequence with him and Joe Quesada, and I forget who else was there, Fabian Nicieza, I think, and one other person, and they would do like a 5-minute discussion about the X-Men. And that's where I first got his philosophy on inclusion, on anti-bigotry, on finding a way to put messages into pop culture. And his stories and the X-Men and other Marvel comics were my first lesson in being a good neighbor and being a good person, and not treating someone like crap just because they don't look like you or sound like you or have the same background as you
or have the same mutant power as
right,
you.
Right. And he was the co-creator of some of the greatest superheroes of our time. Spider-Man was the first true superhero who was a teenager with problems, right? He was poor. He could never have a date that went well because his superpowers got in the way of it. Stan Lee was a part of making superheroes that had flaws, which was a big difference from the DC superheroes at the time. There was some commenter online, so I don't know who first put it, but they put it well, where I read they said that DC superheroes are effectively gods trying to be people, and Marvel superheroes are people trying to be gods. So people with powers that have human problems. And so I soaked up everything about it. I was really obsessed with the storytelling he was doing. I wanted to be him at one point. I wanted to start my own comic book company and do the kinds of things that he was doing. In the 6th grade, I did a report on Stan Lee that I spent like a month working on. It was the hardest I'd ever worked on any class project ever. Went to the Fargo Public Library looking through microfilm and trying to find any info on the guy that I could. So he was someone who always meant something to me and was one of the very few celebrities that I thought, I want to meet that person, and I'm probably going to cry when I do. And unfortunately, I never got the chance to, so I was overcome with emotion when I found out he had passed.
So you said a lot in that last sequence of
I'm
comments.
Sort of big on this topic.
That was good.
So.
No, that covered a lot of territory. And when you mentioned Lee as co-creator, at what age did you? Because I think it's important to also look at the fullness of a person's life, and Lee took some criticism for not sharing the co-creative credit with really important people like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and calling that, work for hire. And I mean, the whole work for hire thing could be an interesting side conversation,
right?
Because it also came back to haunt Stan Lee.
Yep.
But I wonder about, I mean, I had all the same kind of emotional feelings that you had growing up, and I'm a part of a generation older. So my first experience with Stan Lee was, of course, reading his asides in the comic books that I started reading in the 1970s, and of course, when I was 10 years old, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was one of my favorite shows, and Lee's narration was so great, so important on that series because he's instantly recognizable. There was a 1976 record album called Spider-Man Confessions of a Teenage Superhero, Confessions of a Superhero, and it was like a prog rock opera, really weird thing. And the album on the record, it credited the musical performances to all these Marvel characters, right? It was like Hulk on drums, and like Conan and the Barbarians on something.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, they even had like Thor and Falcon on hand claps and something.
Yeah.
But Lee was he was the voice in that flowery, purple, prosy way that we came to associate with his use of all these really colorful vocabulary words. And that's one of the things I loved about him, was that he was, as you said, a natural storyteller with a great capacity for language.
Yep.
And just appreciating how much fun it could be to come up with like alliterative phrases and things like that. And that, so I kind of learned about language and writing. I mean, the guy just would write and write and write. It's like he was still writing probably last week.
Right. Oh, yeah. He, I mean, it was super active. You watch a lot of his interviews, even from a couple of years ago, and he's very spry and running around and full of energy and loving what he was doing. And I think it's absolutely right to talk about the co-creator status. Because one thing you learn too when you grow up and you research your heroes even more is you find out what their flaws are, and definitely ego would have been something that he would have been a demon of his for a long time. But at the same time, I could say that about a lot of the brilliant geniuses who were out there.
Walt Disney,
right, right, and
George Lucas too.
And luckily, even though he said that stuff about work for hire, at the very least, when you read the comics, you do get that co-creator credit. So when I read Stan Lee's name, I also read Steve Ditko's name and Jack Kirby and John Buscema and John Byrne and just countless other amazing creative talents that after Stan had even more to do with the success of Marvel. So it didn't all come out of the fount of this one man's head, but it's definitely a demarcation point in the history of comic books, the passing of this legend, because I don't know what other legends from his era are really even alive anymore.
It was down to the next generation almost. I mean, Roy Thomas was talking about having just communicated with Lee. He was working with him in recent weeks and said that that Lee was tired and ready to go, was the quotation
his
that
wife
I
had
saw.
passed away not too long ago.
2 years ago. And I think when that happened, like as is often the case when people who've been together for 6 decades or more, when one spouse dies, the other feels ready to let go.
You had mentioned the album, and that sparked a memory in my head. One of my prized possessions that my dad gave me is a 1976 bicentennial calendar that Marvel made. And the cover image is sort of a revolutionary style. There's a drummer and a flutist and a flag holder, and they're all Marvel characters sort of marching along. And then every month was given a character, and then there would be different jokes and days set aside. And I actually learned a lot of background of these different characters from that calendar itself. Like, that calendar is how I found out that Spider-Man at one point had a vehicle. He had a spider car. It was effectively a Jeep without a top. And the joke was that he only had it for like 1 or 2 issues. And then it got dumped into the ocean where it sank, and it's just been there ever since. And so it was like in loving memory of the Spider-Mobile. And it shows this upside down Jeep in the water. And then they would also add in birthdays of various artists and writers. And so you could get to know them that way. And they just had such a spirit of fun and taking themselves both seriously and not seriously.
Another thing Roy Thomas mentioned was that Lee took such great pleasure in doing the cameos, and introducing him to upcoming generations that'll probably maybe lifelong fans of Marvel. A lot of kids are learning about Marvel through the movies first now, rather than through the comic books first. And so we, our generations and older had obviously the different experience where they existed on the page, it really in multiple guises through different writers and different artists. But now when they're portrayed, in this phase one by a single actor for a certain period of time, kids are getting introduced to Stan Lee that way. Which of the MCU cameos is the one that stands out the most for you?
I think my favorite one is when they finally establish that he is a continuous character from movie to movie. It might have been Guardians 2, I think, where you see him in a spacesuit and he's talking with the Watchers.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
And then he's basically listing off like, yep, and then I was a delivery man, and then one time I did this and I did that. And so there's this sort of MCU explanation of that makes Stan Lee part of the continuity of that world, that he's sort of this traveling character,
a shapeshifter,
or someone who is immortal. Maybe he is a brother of the Grand Master or something like that. So I think I like that one because I just it from a fan's perspective, from a lover of Marvel Comics and a worshiper of Stan Lee, that was sort of in the spirit of the 1976 calendar.
Yeah,
or the sort of breaking the fourth wall almost.
Definitely. That's the one I would have mentioned first as well, because it also, in addition to all the things you said, it incorporates his self-deprecating sense of humor, right? The Watchers walk away and he's like, hey, where are you going? Guys, I need a lift. Who's gonna take me home? That sort of style.
I'm a big fan of. So first and foremost, I did not grow up reading comic books. So my first introduction to Stan Lee, I knew who he was. I mean, I know who Spider-Man is and all these things. But my first introduction to the man was in the movie Mallrats.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That cameo sparked an interest that got me reading comic books and got me to get to know this guy even better. And I mean, it really is top notch the way that they wove him into the script for that, and the way he approaches Jason Lee in front of the lingerie department.
Yep.
And it's really great. But I think my favorite cameo is in Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2. Because I think that he loved the character of Captain Stacy so much that if you note, both of his cameos in that is pulling a child away from falling rubble, which, according to the Spider-Man encyclopedia I have, is how Captain Stacy ends up dying.
Yep. So Spider-Man 1 has that. Spider-Man 2, he actually meets Peter Parker on the side of the street.
He has his
and he
really
says,
famous line.
He says, like, I guess someone can make
One
a difference.
person. Yeah, I guess one person really can make a
difference. It wasn't
difference.
Excelsior, though. He said,
Enough said.
Enough said, which is another Stan Lee
Ism.
phrase.
Yeah.
Stan Lee-ism.
And that one got repeated a lot on the day he died as part of his almost like an online epitaph to say, one person can make a difference.
Yep.
Which ties back into all that sort of, moralistic and kind of enlightened attitudes that Lee was pretty early to embrace.
Yep.
The idea of having regularly established characters of color in interacting and then introducing finally characters that were the stars of their own series, like Black Panther.
Yep. Or like the X-Men, where there is this the whole book is about racial prejudice and bigotry of what they were saying, because that would have started in the late 60s, I want to say, when X-Men 1 came out. Or
was
early
it even
70s?
late? Or it was even before that, wasn't
Was
it?
it the early 60s?
It was, yeah.
Well, it was
we'd
in the
have to
middle
look
of the
it
Civil
up.
Rights era,
Yeah.
basically, and the X-Men came out. And I remember, especially from the cartoon
I can just
series,
see steam coming out of the ears of some of our listeners, right? Like I was going to name some names and be like, "What you amateurs? You don't know the month and date of X-Men 1 and when it was on the newsstand?
I don't. But
come on.
But I remember from the X-Men cartoon and from those Pizza Hut videos, their conversations they had, that in the X-Men, especially in the 90s, the most popular characters were the female characters in the team. Everyone loved Storm, Psylocke, Rogue, Jean Grey, Shadowcat, Jubilee, and on and on and on. And so that established very early on for me too that women are superheroes just like men are superheroes.
Right.
And so I just have always taken that as a given, and I'm really thankful for those stories. Someone else also said that it might have been the Disney retrospective video that I saw that referred to Stan Lee as effectively making our modern mythology, like helping flesh out our modern mythology.
Sure. Yes.
Even comic book people who are not comic book fans know about Spider-Man and probably know about the radioactive spider and the things he can do and some very basic story plots to him.
And the kind of universalism of the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right. Everyone knows who the Hulk is.
Yeah.
Hulk is just a international phenomenon, right? And these are all part of our consciousness. And Greg and I have talked a lot about how both, because of the prominence of DC and Marvel, basically every superhero archetype you can think of has been generated, as far as we can tell. And so any new superheroes that come out, you would say, oh, that's a Superman analog. That's a Captain America analog. That's a Hulk analog. That's a Spider-Man analog. And Lee was at the center of so much of that craft and creation. It boggles the mind what sort of standards they set for the genre of superheroes. And I struggle to think of what the industry would have been like had Marvel never happened, had Stan Lee never been there, and would comics have taken the turn that they did, or would they have gone the way of other things? Like when Marvel came around, superheroes were in decline. Really, when Time Lee changed to Marvel, they were doing cowboy western stuff and romance stuff and horror stuff, and their superhero titles were dying because superheroes were going out, and Marvel changed that when they really took a new tack and created the Fantastic Four to compete with the Justice League. And the Fantastic Four was this family of people who did not get along. They had arguments, and their powers were also a curse in some ways. And
Reed Richards is a workaholic.
Ben Grimm looks like a monster. He can't go anywhere without being seen. Invisible Woman was almost an analog for basically how women were treated. She seemed invisible to everyone else, but you later find out that she is the most powerful member because her abilities extend far beyond what you can find. So I guess I'm going to continue speaking to the point of rambling because the topic is so important to me, but I just cannot imagine where comic books would be now without his input. I don't think we wouldn't have had this the same sort of resurgence of interest that the movies have made.
Well, yeah, and I think one of the points that was I don't want to let it get lost in that comment is the importance of a shared universe, because that I think was Lee's architecture, is making sure that these characters could interact with one another.
Most of them were in New York City,
and using New York City and real New York City as opposed to a Gotham or a Metropolis as a stand-in, and that was pretty exciting. The notion of shared universe and the emphasis placed on it. One of the cartoons that was released the day after Stan Lee died was him arriving at the pearly gates, right? And St. Peter is saying, "You're not so bad at creating universes yourself," and kind of a warm, irreverent but warm take on the idea that it's true as a figure of 20th century popular culture. It's and thankfully he lived long enough to see and reap, and there's a lot of pleasure to be taken in that he was around to see, because remember in the 70s when they would license Spider-Man for everything. It didn't matter. I mean, there was a desperation. So not only, a little kid, you wouldn't care because you were just getting coloring books and, toys or Pez dispensers or whatever. But there was a ton of crap, garbage. And so to have it come back, and I mean, there were lots of, it was a roller coaster ride, certainly, financially speaking. I mean, and some of the obituaries kind of got into that a little bit.
I mean, he lived long enough to see that his legacy is secure.
Yeah.
And that these characters will endure now because they've proven to stand the test of time.
Yeah.
That new generations latch onto them.
Definitely.
Well, and he also has something coming up that few people who've passed away have, which is how many more cameos has he pre-filmed for some of the MCU movies? Like he's gonna
At least the next Avengers. We know that.
Yeah.
So we've still got Stan Lee stuff coming that nobody's ever seen before, which is really, I mean, it's sort of like Prince's archives, right?
Yeah.
So even after death, you've got the ability to continue to enjoy brand new things from somebody.
Another thing I've really been enjoying post Lee's death has been watching interviews where he just rips on DC, because you can tell he's having fun with it. Like he's just, it's fun to rip on the competition. And I'm a DC fan too. Don't get me wrong. I love those characters as well.
I am not as much.
But
a couple. It's very
the movies haven't done right by them of late.
Sure. And even in his 90s, he'd be like, well, the reason Thor had his hammer is because I hated the fact that Superman could just fly and you didn't know why. So I was like, let's make a reason for this guy to fly. And then he gave the reason of swinging the hammer and letting it go, and then the loop on it pulls him with it, and ridiculous ideas, but in the context of mythology building for superheroes, fantastic ideas.
Well, and Lee, and I think you're right in saying that it was gentle, the competition on some level in his golden years, because he wrote for DC too. You know, he created work for DC at one point in his career, and he even cameoed in the Teen Titans Go movie. I mean, that's another thing to show like how universal the guy is, that he's included in both of the major cinematic universes.
There's really not a DC analog to Stan Lee, is there?
No, I mean not in terms of media visibility, right? You could say that Julia Schwartz was really, really important because as a kind of a progenitor to what Lee was able to accomplish, like creating, like reinvigorating superheroes when they were on the decline and kind of getting people to take a look at those again. But your comment earlier about how gods trying to be men and men trying to be gods as a way to delineate Marvel and DC, I think that is the reason that so many casual comic book readers gravitate towards Marvel. If you're a hardcore like an Andy Kunka, who probably is arguably, he would hold up DC as a favorite or a place where so many favorites reside. I mean, he's, Andy is sort of godlike in his own understanding of the comic book universe. I mean, there's no question about that. But I remember listening to Andy because, you can't, I don't know that I would dare to engage him in any kind of debate about comics because his knowledge is so deep, and so to kind of get him to open up and talk about the difference between Marvel and DC, because he was able to kind of help me come to terms with, because I thought there's no competition, it's Marvel, make mine Marvel. Like there's no, when you're an angsty kid going through puberty and you connect with the X-Men.
Think of it this way. If you're comparing the two, take Batman out of the DC universe, and then how well does it fare? Like the popularity of Batman, I think alone, not that Superman and Wonder Woman and Flash and them are not popular. They're hugely popular. Superman is super well known. But I don't know if there is a superhero on this planet with a larger rabid fan base than Batman.
Right. I mean, he was for many, many years easily the most popular superhero.
And he's got what they call plot armor, which is that even though he has no superpowers per se, you understand that when he's in the room, he's going to be the smartest guy. He's going to find the solution. He's going to cut through the bullshit, and he's going to be the one that everyone is surprised by at the end of the day because he's so cool. We think he's awesome. So that he will always be at the forefront of any group photo, and he'll be the most visible one.
Right. Yeah, and durable in that sense. Like the recasting that you mentioned, JJ, is so apt when you're having a discussion about Batman, because there's a Batman for all seasons. There's a Batman for everyone. When I was on a panel, when I saw Lori heading out, it reminded me I was on a panel about a variety of things related to comic books at the Fargo Public Library. And one of the questions that came during the Q&A session was who's the best Batman? And for me, without hesitation, I was like, well, it's Adam West. I mean, Adam West is that's the greatest media Batman for me, because it's the one that connected with me when I was a kid. And even though it's, light and campy and there were plenty of bad episodes of that show, there's something that was so technicolor, eye-popping, special, and fun about being Batman that when I read Frank Miller's Batman a few years later, I thought, oh, this is also an interesting Batman, and obviously became so influential that it's pretty much the template become now. Still like holding hard, with the exception of things like The Brave and the Bold, and some other fun things, but it's the one that people think of, and it hasn't done Batman any favors, in my opinion.
And like speaking of your childhood, for me to answer that Batman question, it would be Kevin Conroy,
right?
It would
because
be the voice
of the animated series.
Of the animated series, and he is still their go-to Batman voice for everything.
In fact, when he said that he was retiring from it, my heart broke a little bit that day, and I'm like,
didn't realize
there's
he did
no
that.
way. Yeah, well, when they were like, well, we're gonna make a couple more of these like Arkham games, he's like, okay,
yeah, that money's good.
My
That's some good
personal
money.
opinion is Mask of the Phantasm is my favorite Batman
Love
movie,
that
which
movie.
was just re-released on the big screen, which is very exciting. And when I tell people Mask of the Phantasm, people in Tucker and I's generation are like, oh yeah, I remember that. But newer Batman fans didn't know that they made this movie based on the amazing Batman animated series that we had.
Greg and I have talked a lot about Batman the Brave and the Bold, and I'm a huge fan of the Bruce Timm animated series. Obviously, I grew up on that. I love that series. But after a while, I think my personal preference, if I had to compare the two, might be Brave and the Bold. And that might have just been the time in my life when I watched it where I thought, all right, I've been getting the same Batman for years now. This sort of dark, Tim Burton, Frank Miller-esque, Dirty Harry version of Batman. And watching The Brave and the Bold, which, if you've seen it, is essentially like a 3-season-long love letter to the history of Batman. You get, like Greg said, a Batman for all seasons. There are even episodes where they cycle through, Pirate Batman and Space Batman and Buccaneer Batman and Football Batman and, Batmans of every shade of the rainbow.
Right. When the Supreme Court a few years ago passed the legalization of same-sex marriage, it was I couldn't wait to use the panel of Batman saying, I must, Robin, I must wear a different colored bat suit every night, and it has the rainbow. He's in the Batcave with a rainbow color. And those gimmicks, when they came out, were again, some people would hold their nose and be like, oh, that's not, what Batman deserves. Batmite is not what Batman deserves. But I like Batmite.
Yeah, he's so durable that he will he will survive any permutation someone comes up with. And to bring it back to Marvel stuff and Stan Lee, though, and comics in general, so like there are eras of comics that are my favorite because they're the ones that I was first exposed to. So the Bronze Age ones, which my dad had, and then the modern age comics I was biting in the early 90s. And
we talked about that too, like how you were really lucky that your dad gave you the Bronze Age stuff because you got a foothold early. Like you were on the mountain before, because of my age, I had tapered off.
Yep.
And so the modern age stuff, when there was the naked cash grab of splitting up the team and creating multiple titles, Excalibur and so on, X-Force, I was so disheartened by it because I was at the peak of my comic buying. It was like 20, 25 titles a month.
Right.
And for a kid on paper route money,
wow.
First of all, it's hard to keep up. I mean, because you're spending so much time tracking it down and reading it all. And then you're just like, now I can't buy my roast beef and Dr. Pepper at Hardee's, because I got to buy some comics.
But to the point though is I walk into a comic book shop now, which I still love going to comic shops, and I look at the new comics that are being made, and I think they're cool. I sometimes I pick one up and I read them, but I'm just not that drawn to them as physical objects. The coloring style is different. They're printing it on different materials. They restart issue numbering about once a year because number one issues are the ones that really sell, and then issues just taper off after that. It's really difficult industry to make money in. So the product has changed from the product that I became nostalgic for, but I still have all my old comics. They still go back, and I can still go and enjoy a new Spider-Man comic and like it a lot for what it is, I know that if they make a Spider-Man comic that I hate, I still got all the old ones that I love. Those aren't going anywhere. And we need these characters and storylines to be reinvented over and over again. And now that the movies have come out and shown these characters and stories to so many more people, the audience is much broader and more inclusive, and you're getting more comics that don't look just like the three of us sitting in this room, right? You got superheroes of color, of all genders and sizes and races, and new fans coming into it that are really falling in love with it. I can't tell you how excited I am for the Spider-Man animated movie that's coming out with Miles Morales and the other Spider-Man. I guess
Spider-Gwen.
is like Batman in that there are so many different permutations
Batman
of him.
Incorporated, right? It's the same kind of idea now, and I find that very appealing.
I love
too.
it.
But there is on the dark side, on the flip side of the coin, there's that kind of entrenched swath of comic book fans who don't want to take that progressive leap, and they're incredibly misogynistic,
And it can only be the way that I had it as a kid. It cannot be any other way, and you can't enjoy it because I get to enjoy
And
it.
fortunately, it seems like the creators and the most powerful platform related, which would be the media incarnations, like the movies, seem to be able to break away from some of that entrenchment. Because I remember the opening night of Black Panther, and on the Marvel or Black Panther Reddits, there were people actively rooting against Black Panther.
Right.
There was a guy, I remember one of the most upvoted images was an empty lobby in a theater where the poster said, the person who posted it said, check this out, opening night where, it's empty. Where's everybody for Black Panther? Well, of course, we know what happened. And so I don't know what that poster is doing right now. But maybe, hopefully, continuing to stew in his juices, about how everything's wrong and the world's passed him by.
Right. Being into comics the time that we were into them, in a way, meant you were in part of an out group, because liking comics was considered a kid's thing or not something that you would talk about in mixed company. You'd be like, oh, hey guys, I read comic books, and oftentimes you would be derided for it. And then I think sometimes when people grow up in that, they feel like they want to keep it their own group, and then they start treating other people like the out group, and they just don't see their own hypocrisy for some reason. Like, the whole reason I liked comics was because comics didn't judge me, and I got all these great stories of people standing up to bullies, people fighting for justice and for equality and all that, everything else. And I can look at those old comics and go, yeah, wow, they were targeting them towards people who look just like me. Mm-hmm. And let's change that, because I don't need it to be just me. I want other people to come and find these stories and make them their own. That's the way we should be embracing it.
It's great that people feel some ownership over these as part of their fandom, but I do also believe that they don't like the fact that there are other people who are now coming to the party.
Yeah.
You take someone like my sister who loves the MCU movies, and she's never cracked open a comic book, and she never will crack open a comic book. And on a couple of nights, when I go to the opening of some of these movies, I hear someone ripping apart someone like, yeah, she doesn't even know like anything about this.
Yeah,
like
sort of gatekeeping, gatekeeping.
And it's like, well, so what? And in fact, I think that she's got a completely different experience, because when she's watching Infinity War or Civil War, she knows nothing about it. And so this is all brand new information versus just like someone who's read the book that the movie's based on or happens to know the comic series really well. There are some things you expect to come from it. So it's just taking in that story in a different medium, and it should be embraced, right?
Right. And if you'd say you're a fan of Doctor Strange, like you've always been a fan of Doctor Strange, the only reason you're getting new Doctor Strange comics these days is because they were reinvigorated by this movie, this fantastic movie with Benedict Cumberbatch. And you should be happy as a comic book fan that we're getting comic book movies now that are very much like the comics that we read in tone, especially at the MCU. You look at any of their flagship their titles, and you go, wow, this is very much in the spirit of the comic book that I am used to, versus the Fox X-Men comics, which are very much a version of, even though I like those movies enough, but you look at it, you can tell that this was a Hollywood studio going, okay, we have this property, but let's make our cool Hollywood version of it. No, they can't be in brightly colored costumes. That's stupid. Let's put them in black leather. That looks cool. Let's make sure that Wolverine is tall, dark, and handsome. Like, let's make sure that. So it looks somewhat like the thing that I remember, but it doesn't feel like the thing that I remember. I can still enjoy it enough. And I don't need it to be exactly what I want, but it at no point evoked the spirit of it that I thought, versus these new movies, which even if they change things that would have been part of the original story, they can still make a story that is absolutely in the spirit of the character.
Well, and lest we forget, there have been some pretty major stumbles in bringing these characters to the big screen. Once a year, I love to watch through the Roger Corman Fantastic Four on YouTube. Oh, boy, do I just enjoy that from start to finish. Even the Amazing Spider-Man 2 off that we got, I watched those and I was like, ugh, I just don't enjoy these as much as I want to. And it's not because I thought the Tobey Maguire series was great. In fact, I think that Spider-Man 3 in the Tobey Maguire series is the best, just garbage. But I think because people love these characters so much and they love the work that Stan Lee did, they're willing to forgive just about anything to see it again. And that's the longevity of these characters. I look at something like, I'm a huge fan of the Muppets. People are not as forgiving about the Muppets on the whole. Me as a Muppet fan, I will always go see a movie no matter what. But I think when they have a movie that doesn't perform as well, all of a sudden the Fairweather Friends take off and they're like, well, there's no point in going to see the next one.
Is that in part because the original performers have died and have left the fold? I mean, is that, do you think that that's part of it? Because I know for me, it was hard to transition to new voices for some of the characters that, like when Carol Spinney announced, it's finally time to step away. I'm just thinking like, wow, it's Carol Spinney. Like I just have a really hard time imagining someone else in the voice of Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch.
I think that there could be something for that, but like I really enjoy Muppet Christmas Carol, Muppet Treasure Island,
the Jug Band.
Oh, I'm so excited that Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas is coming. But those two movies, Christmas Carol and Treasure Island, had almost all of the original voice cast and performers. And then by the time you got from Muppets from Space, I was like, ugh, this just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it's in the same genre of storytelling. And even that, you still had Frank Oz doing the voice of Piggy and Fozzie. I just think people learned or forgot how to write. Richard Jewell knew how to write for the Muppets.
So since you're the Muppet connoisseur, what for you is the absolute pinnacle, the high point of all things Muppet? Like where's the place that you direct someone to say this is when they were on firing on all cylinders?
I want to guess. I want to just hazard a guess.
Yes.
Let's you and I both hazard a guess at what JJ's going to say.
All right, sure.
This is a bit risky, but I'm going to say Follow That Bird.
Oh, okay. Very interesting.
I'm not even looking at JJ as I say it because I don't want to tip any hand here.
Because my initial inclination was to say like season 2 Muppet Show.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
Maybe, but I want to hear JJ.
There. If I'm pushing someone who's never seen any Muppet stuff before, I tell them to start with The Great Muppet Caper.
Oh, okay.
And I tell them that because as a genre, as a heist movie, people I think can get into that right off the bat. And then you get a really great introduction to just the humor of what the Muppets do. And it's a fun set piece movie. And then after that, I tell them, you got to go back and watch The Muppet Show and watch it from beginning to end. And, I always tell people one of my favorite episodes is the Carol Burnett episode where she keeps trying to do the lonely asparagus number and they keep finding reasons that she can't.
One of the things that the Muppets achieved that I find just spectacular is that we think of Kermit and Miss Piggy and Fozzie Bear and everyone else as actors, as actual actors in the real world. So it's like, they did this production of the night before, or of
A Christmas Carol.
And they got Kermit to play that character. That's great. I'm glad he's getting more work, right?
Uh-huh.
You kind of think of them in terms of that. I remember seeing TV interviews with Miss Piggy and with Kermit, where they're just being interviewed like regular people. They've been able to create puppet characters that, even though we all know they're puppets, we still sort of think of them as actual creatures in that space, which allows them then to, they can make all these movies and not have to say like, oh, it's a shared universe. Well, the shared universe is all these actors exist in real life, and these are the movies that they make.
It's almost like a tie back to Stan Lee, because Lee's early depictions as a character inside the comics too, where he was the Reed Richards of Fantastic Four, and he got to be interpreted by multiple artists. I think I saw as many illustrations of Stan Lee in the days before the internet. I would have seen more illustrations of him than I would have seen like photographs of him.
He had a great interview that someone reposted recently that was taken within the last year and a half. And in the interview, they talk about, isn't it amazing that you're doing this? He goes, I am honored every time someone wants to hear a 90-year-old man talk about these things that I helped create. And he goes, I can't hear most of the questions anymore, but it's really an honor. And that's the thing, you talked earlier about like it's the kindly old uncle that you can't wait to see.
Right.
And I think he was genuinely excited. You watch footage of him at cons, and he's genuinely excited to meet the fans, especially young fans. Because if you think of a career that spanned as long as he does, where you're constantly meeting young people, and it's not just one fan base that gets older and older and older as they go along, that really is the testament to a legacy.
There are a lot of interviews out there now of different of the actors who are in all the MCU movies and the Fox Marvel movies and everything, talking about their experiences at cons where they would show up for a signing and be like, where are my fans? And they'd be down talking to Stan Lee. Like if Stan Lee was on the panel, it didn't matter who you were, everyone there wanted to see him. Everyone there wanted to talk to him. You could have been the president of the United States and they just would have gone. Not this one, obviously, but
a president
of the United States. And that is huge that he had that kind of effect. And I wonder how many people were like, oh, he's in his 90s. We better do this now. Hugh Jackman will be around for a while, hopefully. So I'll be able to see him at future conventions. But
I know a few people who've met him over the years at different cons, and they all have the same exact thing, which is this is a guy who took the time, like asked what your name was to sign it, and it wasn't like you talked to a handler first who whispered, the name like Greg into his ear, and he signed it and handed off, and there it went. But he said hello, and it's so nice to meet you, and thanks. And then they said the one person met him 3 times and had 3 different comic books he sent, and every time he takes it and so gently, and he's like, oh, this is a great issue because this happens in it, and so. You think like that's someone who's pretty proud of the company they've put together.
Right. And also this just sparked another thought in my head is of him meeting his fans. There's this amazing meme of it would have been a convention where, you can get your photo with Stan Lee real quick, and so fans walk through and he's standing there with you. And there's one of him and a fan who's dressed as Wolverine.
Yeah. It's and if the full picture, it's 2 people in that photo.
Who is the other person dressed as?
It's I want to say it was Phoenix.
I got to see it now.
Yeah, you got to look for the full. If you Google that, you can see the inclusion of the other person.
There's something about the look on Stanley's face and that Wolverine fan that just something about it. It just rules. You gotta check it out. I have to assume that from time to time there might have been a fan that he didn't want to meet, or someone who's like, okay, this guy needs to move on now because he's getting kind of creeping me out.
As Paul F. Tompkins says in his bit about the Spider-Man outside the Chinese theater, he needn't have bothered. Blue sweatpants and a Sharpie-colored T-shirt. So with the passing of Stan Lee, we've arrived at a point of where there are a lot of people that we consider media giants, people who are the quote-unquote dreamers, there's not a lot of people left who I think are widely regarded as just giants.
Because if you're thinking of in the vein of that, like Jim Henson, Stan Lee, Lucas would be one.
I consider Walt Disney.
Right.
And he's of an earlier generation, but still where the name and the brand carries a link back to his first hand influence.
You could probably argue that J.K. Rowling
is
definitely.
I agree.
One of the
with
currents.
that. And I don't, I haven't seen the new one, Grindelwald, Crimes of Grindelwald yet, but the reviews haven't been so great, right? That there's too many characters, too much exposition, not enough moving, in the vein of what connected people to Harry Potter in the first place. So I wonder what because what JJ was saying just a few minutes ago about evergreen properties, the idea that you have to have new generations of fans, even as the Walt Disney himself dies, Stan Lee himself dies, George Lucas has retired.
Yep.
And figuring out how do you communicate the same kind of joy. It has to be the content creators, the Feiges who are the architects behind the scenes. They're not the household names.
But he does have a kind of status amongst Marvel fans.
Definitely among fans.
That there's no way he's got to be the most famous movie producer on the earth right now as far as just recognizability. It depends on who you're talking to, certainly, but as far as mainstream media goes, the MCU
I think
effectively
he certainly
owns
is,
the box office.
Yeah, he's the most powerful now.
Maybe that's the right word.
I think of like the Kathleen Kennedys out there who've have got a pretty great track
and at the
record
same time,
for billions.
he's not in the same vein as Lee or Henson or Rowling in that he's not generating something new in the same sense as he is like an ultra fan who is very, very good at protecting the legacy of and making new media and finding new audience members that retain the spirit of the old media. But yeah, I can't think of someone else right now. And would it really be, we're just talking people in media, right? Storytelling, Henson, Lucas, Lee, Rowling. But that I think that's got to extend then in some way.
Well,
past that.
To some extent, you can say Steve Jobs, but we've lost Steve Jobs as well.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like, there's certainly that aspirational, mythical figurehead status that comes with it.
When you associate a brand with a person in particular, I think
it's like the KFC Colonel. He's one of those dreamers.
No, they've also done KFC Incorporated because now they have a whole bunch of different actors portraying the Colonel. They know that that's the icon of the brand.
Yeah.
When do you think we're going to see a shared fast food mascot universe? Is that?
I think we're living in one.
We might, yeah. I was at the store and I love board games and collecting board games. Also to the chagrin of my spouse, who was like stuffing them all.
We never play these.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, I can't wait for her to hear this because she said, "Oh, by the way, I put all the board games down in the storage under the seat bins, And I was like, "Oh," and she's like, "Yeah, you never play them." And I wanted to say, "I've played Bigfoot, the giant snow monster game, twice in the last week." So that's not true. But anyway, I saw a Monster Cereals game. Have you seen this? It's nice design, retro design. It's got Count Chocula, Fruit Brute, Frankenberry, Boo Berry, Fruity Yummy Mummy. And it involves
that's a shared universe.
It involves like bowls of cereal. I don't know if I can incorporate the actual cereal into the game, but I miss the 1970s incarnation of Count Chocula, the actual physical cereal, so much that I had a dream about it a couple nights ago about eating the version of it that had the better texture, that was closer to Cheerios than the kind of air puffed version that is out now and is just not the same.
I was just reading, Nerdist had an article about how they're kind of banding around the idea of doing like a Monster Cereal movie universe.
Well, the Dark Universe didn't take off, so they might as well go with the cereal version of it.
In my mind, I'm like, yeah, I would go check that out for sure. And also, this is a weird thing too, but the Muppets had a comic book series, and I think Marvel put that out, didn't they?
Yes.
Marvel
Yeah.
did a bunch of licensed stuff. Marvel was the first one to do Star Wars comics before Dark Horse took over for a while. But
A lot of great movie tie-ins.
right. Of course,
Yeah.
that's full reverse now because they're both Star Wars and Marvel are owned by Disney.
Right.
So are the Muppets.
So are the Muppets. And I would like to actually make a prediction right now. I don't know what timeline this would happen on, but I believe that at some point in our lifespan, Disney will own both Marvel and DC.
Oh, wow.
And that there will be a unification of the universes because it doesn't really make as much sense anymore to keep them separate. And comic books themselves are a really difficult business to make money at. It's really a lost leader of building up properties for movies and other merchandise and things like that. But as time goes on, these media groups become consolidated. They just do. And depending on how Warner Brothers does and other things like that, I could absolutely see at some point maybe Disney and Warner Brothers merges or there's some other weird thing or some... but at some point...
It's not a merger. It's a buyout.
But at some point, Batman will be hanging out with Spider-Man in New York City. It's going to happen. We've already had crossovers in the comics.
Right, for many years.
Where the two companies work together. And at some point, they're just basically the same thing. And that's going to happen.
Let's face it, we all desperately want that Patton Oswalt monologue from Parks and Recreation where the X-Men and Star Wars, and they all just...
Another prized possession that my dad gave me were those Treasury Edition comics, Marvel comics, that are a much larger print size, which once you have one in your hand, you go, I wish every issue I had was like this because you can really
Like
see
a broadsheet. It's like a newspaper.
Yeah, and you can see the art really gorgeously,
Yeah.
and it looks nice. And one of them was I think it was the second time DC and Marvel had done a crossover. And so it's Superman, Hulk, Spider-Man, and Wonder Woman. And Spider-Man effectively goes to Metropolis and gets some photography work at the Daily Planet, while Clark Kent ends up going to New York City and doing some work at the Daily Bugle.
Whoa.
And then he runs into the Hulk, and they have a fight in the city, and Doctor Doom is there, and I believe, Parasite. So Superman's villain, the Parasite, who can suck the power out of you. Those were the two villains, and Spider-Man came into conflict with Wonder Woman at one point, and they all teamed up at the end. And that blew my mind to think that these characters from totally different universes are acting as if they're in the same universe at one point, and eventually they will be.
So let's round out this podcast by saying if there was a piece of Marvel history that you think people should consume that maybe they're not, whether it's in a particular issue of a comic or a movie or a television episode, something along those lines, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good question.
It is. I mean, I think Tucker referred earlier to the idea that when you're at a certain age and you are confronted with, and interact with something that leaves a huge impression on you, that can have a really lasting impact. In my case, I started reading.
You always see it with rose-colored glasses.
Definitely, because I started reading X-Men in the early 1980s, and so I fell in love with Kitty Pryde, and people who ask who's my favorite superhero, or when my son asks, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And he asks me that a lot because he's a 10-year-old boy right now. And my answer is always the same. I would have Kitty Pryde's powers, as I find Kitty Pryde's powers completely fascinating. She can't fly, but effectively her abilities are beyond what we would initially think. Oh, she can phase through or walk through solid objects, walk through walls. The girl who could walk through walls, but it's so much more than that.
Right. She can walk on the air.
She can walk on the air, right? And I, of course, then I started reading X-Men before I went through puberty, and so Kitty Pryde was my crush. I related so closely to her tribulations on the team because she was a 13-year-old initially and wasn't allowed to play with the big kids, and her frustrations, the way they manifested those for many issues, a whole series of issues. I was like, I'm right there with you, Kitty Pryde. Like it was in a weird way, I was relating to this 13-year-old Jewish superhero, even though I was, a white boy from the upper Midwest.
Yeah. There's a book called How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
Yeah, I thought you were going to mention that today.
Written by Stan Lee and illustrated by my favorite illustrator, John Buscema. And that book and Greg Carlson are the two things that I attribute to my visual sense when it comes to like filmmaking and things like that. Reading that book, which when I was a kid and I wanted to get into comic books, and that was like the book to have. There's a whole chapter on panel layout, basically on sequential art storytelling, that is a better description of storyboarding and image composition and pacing and storytelling flow than anything else you'll find. And anytime I meet someone who wants to get into movie making or any sequential art like that, I say, read this book and go to that chapter and read that chapter, because that will tell you everything you need to know. And then also there's this amazing chapter on, drawing male heroes and female heroes, and the different like techniques that, like how you would draw the mouth of a female hero versus a male hero, and how wide the hips are and things like that. The best chapter though is on drawing supervillains, because supervillains have the most interesting looks in comic books, and they have these great pages where they show panels of different oblong shapes that Buscema would start with before finishing out the Mole Man or Magneto or Doctor Doom or the Scarlet Witch when she was a villain, or all these characters, and then it's got Stan Lee's prose to go along with it. And it's a phenomenal book. There's also an accompanying VHS videotape that you can watch, but that would be it. I still have that book, and I love that book.
Interesting. I'm a fan of some of the limited run series. Like, I really liked Marvel Zombies when it came out, but I really, really loved Marvel 1602. Where
right.
It was all set back in, like, have you ever
Pilgrim
read
Days,
that?
basically.
I didn't read it. No.
I love the kitschy aspect of it, of like Doctor Doom is this like Puritan governor of Virginia, and I got a real kick out of that.
That's great.
Modern mythology, you can put it in any era and come up with a version of it. We've seen like steampunk versions of Batman.
Yes.
Or Gotham by Torch, or Gotham by Lamplight, I think is what it's called.
Right.
So superheroes are so great as a genre because you can take them and put them in any time period and make a version of that thing then.
One last thing I wanted to say about Stan Lee, since he was the topic of the hour, was that some of the obituaries commented real specifically on the way that he collaborated, putting it in a positive spin, that rather than script out and dictate every thing that needed to happen panel to panel, he would kind of just give an outline to the artist, let them fill in even the dialogue, and then he would go back and rewrite and kind of, and that became the Marvel method.
Yep.
And that's fascinating, because he was, who knows, in a practical way, maybe producing so much content that was the necessity, but also it probably gave room for those other creators to exercise some of their imaginative skills.
That's a good way to end this podcast. Greg Carlson, thank you very much for coming on.
It was a pleasure.
This is your fourth time?
Is
Fifth
it?
time?
I don't know. Gotta think this through.
His episode, Bill Brooks,
I
and
feel
then
like
you
there
were
was one
back
more.
again.
I feel like there was one more.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about that.
Yeah.
So
I wasn't
think-
prepared. That information's in a file drawer in my brain somewhere.
Don't worry, because we have some listeners who have an encyclopedic knowledge of JJ
We
Meets
also have a
World.
great
Ooh, I like
episode
that.
with Greg's wife, Katie Smith.
There
I'm
you go.
blanking on the number of it now, but that's also an awesome podcast to go listen to.
And maybe my kids will come in someday.
That's the plan.
I think that would be a lot of fun.
We've wanted, JJ has long said to me, like, I really want some precocious children to come in. And I was like, I know the two that we're going to use. Absolutely. Forrest and Violet are hilarious kids. And I love talking to them because they're so interested in pop culture and media, and they've got a lot to say, and they're both very funny and smart. And
Well, and they're working their way through the Harry Potter books right
Yeah,
now.
we're
and so
on book 7. I mean, they're about
Closing in then.
We're closing in. Yesterday, I read a chapter that was just tears. It was the chapter where Harry visits his parents' gravesite, and I could not get through the last 2 pages of that. I mean, it was so hard. I was just choked up.
wow.
Because of the way that it expresses. Because as a grown up, it's bringing some closure. to Harry. But the way that Rowling is describing stuff that like maybe 10-year-olds aren't going to understand the same way as how Harry like wants to crawl under the snow, under the earth, and be with his parents. And this is really powerful imagery in that chapter. But there's even more tough stuff to come.
Yes, there is.
I was going to say, the chapter immediately after that, when I read that book the first time, I read that chapter like 4 times because I'm like, wait a minute, what is going on right now? Godric's Hollow. All right, later, Greg.
Thank you.
That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode of JJ Meets World and would like to help us continue to produce 2 new episodes every week, you can donate to our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/JJ Meets World and donate today. Even as little as $1 a month can go a long way. Visit our website at www.jjmeetsworld.com or hit up our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the sites the kids are using these days. If you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcast that you love. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, go to linebenders.com, and you can find direct contact info for JJ. Wait a minute. Whoa, stop. So you're telling me that this #1 issue of the Uncanny X-Men is worth a lot of money? I didn't know that. Like how much? Like $7? $8? No, pay more than $10.